Welcome to Chapter 27, Part 1 in a four-part series, as we take a look at World War II. The groundwork for World War II really kind of began at the conclusion of World War I with the Treaty of Versailles. Now, the Allied powers, as you recall, ended up really kind of punishing Germany, much against the wishes of Woodrow Wilson. But with this treaty, it really kind of blamed and punished Germany for their involvement in the war. Not only did the Germans have to take the blame for the war, but they also had to pay war reparations or war damages for the damages that they caused. They also saw kind of their border redrawn and some of their land taken away. They also had their colonies, kind of redistributed to the Allied powers, and it went further by even limiting the size of the German army, navy, and saying that they couldn't have an air force at all. And so this treaty was very damaging for the Germans, and they had a tough time kind of being able to pay those war reparations, and their economy was hurting. And out of all this, eventually, we see Hitler rise to power. However, the first acts of aggression actually takes place on the other side of the world in 1931 when Japan invades Manchuria, which is just north of China. And Japan at this time actually drops out of the League of Nations. They basically ignore their treaties that they had signed as they invade into Manchuria. Now, the island nation of Japan really kind of lacked natural resources. And so, as they were looking to expand their power and influence, what they needed were those natural resources to kind of keep fueling, their military and economy. Something that we'll see them continue to do is try to expand their power over in Asia as the decade progresses. But turning our attention back to Europe, we see that in 1935, Italy also becomes an aggressor nation. Benito Mussolini, you can see pictured here, ruled as a fascist dictator of Italy, and he looked to try to expand their power influence around the Mediterranean. In fact, he kind of wanted to make the Mediterranean Sea into an Italian lake and kind of revive the old kind of ancient Roman civilization's greatness, and kind of rebuild its economy and make things run smooth. And so you've got kind of several nations looking to kind of expand after having militarized and become more powerful. And at the same time, as you can see from 1936 to 1939, Spain is fighting a civil war. Now, Francisco Franco rises to power in Spain, and he'll actually get the support of both Italy and Germany. Mussolini and Hitler both send kind of troops and supplies and officers to kind of give their own people almost like a dress rehearsal for when they look to kind of expand their own power, to kind of get them battle hardened and experienced. And so, with the aid of Hitler and Mussolini, Franco is able to win the Spanish Civil War and solidify his power there. And just kind of, kind of a famous paint that came out because of the Spanish Civil War is Guernica by Pablo Picasso, which is meant to try to show, kind of the mayhem and destruction and death that war does cause. And as we kind of see different hot spots around the world really starting to flare up, it all kind of gets taken to a new level as Hitler starts to rearm the Rhineland. In March of 1936, Hitler does send troops into this demilitarized zone, kind of the border between Germany and France, the Rhineland. And at the same time, he denounces the Treaty of Versailles. He basically says they're not going to follow it, and it hurts Germany, and he's going to do what he can to kind of bring back their pride and national standing in world affairs. And so here you can kind of see in the map where the Rhineland actually is that got rearmed in 36. But after a couple years pass, Hitler now actually looks to expand his power and boundaries and influence. And Hitler, is once quoted as having said, "No matter how big the lie, if repeated often enough, eventually people will begin to believe it." Well, he was notorious for always kind of saying that Germans were being mistreated in these other countries, and that if something wasn't done, he was going to come and liberate them. And that's kind of what he does in Austria. In September of 1938, he goes over and basically takes Austria without even firing a shot. And he's not going to be satisfied with just Austria, because a short while later, he'll set his eyes upon the Sudetenland, which is kind of the border of Germany and Czechoslovakia. Again, saying that Germans were being mistreated. And as Hitler set his eyes on the Sudetenland, Neville Chamberlain of Great Britain, who, along with France, wanted to meet with Hitler in an attempt to try to avoid conflict. And so these nations meet at Munich in Germany in 1938 to discuss what to do with this most recently kind of gained territory, the Sudeten region of Czechoslovakia. And in an attempt to appease Hitler and kind of give in to his demands, Chamberlain believes he has secured peace for their time, because they got Hitler to agree to go ahead and keep the land he had taken, but promise not to take any more. However, as we have come to find out, and as history has taught us, it was only a few short 6 months later until he will take and conquer the rest of Czechoslovakia. However, the nations still aren't prepared for war. They're still trying to do everything they can to avoid war. But as time goes on, Hitler took the rest of Czechoslovakia. And this is just kind of the final step before war will begin. But whereas Britain and France and obviously the United States and weren't ready to stop Hitler yet, eventually what we'll see is that Hitler is able to actually conquer. And once war is declared, you'll see the influence of where Hitler expands to. Everything in red is basically, Germany's ally or land that they have defeated and conquered. So Hitler is able to defeat much of Europe and North Africa. Not just all of Europe, but also much of North Africa as well, and even into Russia. So this map kind of shows you the extent of his power once war is started. We're just not quite there yet. However, turn our attention back to Japan just briefly. We'll see that in 1937, Japan will extend further into China, with their acts of brutality as they overrun the Chinese, who actually at this time were in the midst of their own civil war. But that's a story we'll get to in future chapters. So while all that stuff was going on in Europe, we see Japan continuing its kind of movement throughout Asia. Meanwhile, back in the United States throughout the 1930s, the U.S. is passing a series of neutrality acts aimed at trying to keep U.S. out of all foreign wars. For example, the United States government, said that U.S. Citizens shouldn't travel on ships of warring nations, to try to kind of not have another Lusitania incident from World War One. These acts also forbid loans and even sales of goods, war goods to nations who were at war, and even eventually extended these precautions to nations that were experiencing a civil war, like Spain was. What we also see is that the Nye Committee was set up by the Senate, which investigated the causes of World War I, and they kind of blamed the merchants of death, as they became known. Places like banks and munitions factories, which kind of pushed the U.S. towards war in an effort to try to make money. And so with all this trouble going on around the world, the U.S. and FDR will declare America's neutrality, even though, as time goes on, he will kind of side with and give some aid to the Allied powers. Others in America wanted to even do more to keep us out of war, and they didn't like the fact that once war is actually declared and fought in Europe, even though the U.S. was staying out of it, by 1940, Congress had actually increased defense spending and even instituted the first peacetime draft in United States history. And as the early part of the war kind of dragged on a little bit, FDR kind of got around the Neutrality Acts by implementing a cash and carry policy to try to aid the Allies. Well, once the America First Committee was kind of started, with one of its members being Charles Lindbergh, they kind of protested these acts of our government, kind of saying that we weren't threatened and that we could defend ourselves if we needed to, and that the two oceans really kind of kept us isolated and safe. And so they didn't like the fact that by 1940 we were kind of slowly preparing for war just in case we ever got dragged into it. But going back here just a little bit, we still weren't at war. But that will quickly change here in 1939. For it was in that year that Mussolini and Hitler formed what becomes known as the Axis powers, because they wanted the Earth to spin on a new axis, one that ran from Rome to Berlin. And eventually, Japan will also join these Axis powers. But the final steps that led up to war took place in August of 1939, beginning with the Non-Aggression Pact, which was signed that month between Germany and the Soviet Union. This agreement basically ensured that Hitler wouldn't face a two-front war as Germany had in World War I. And therefore, with the lack of a Soviet threat or attack, Hitler was able to invade Poland, which was the beginning of World War II. In what becomes known as Blitzkrieg or lightning warfare, that was Hitler's kind of method of overrunning not just Poland, but basically all of Europe. He used the German Air Force or Luftwaffe to kind of go down and strafe and dive bomb and kind of clear out the path for his tanks and armored columns to kind of deliver a crushing blow and an onslaught that eventually really would overrun all of Europe in basically 6 weeks, which World War I couldn't do in 4 years of fighting. But Hitler knew that World War II would be a war of movement, and so he had some of the best tank or panzer divisions. His forces were very mobile, and he was able to deliver powerful striking blows to the countries that he invaded. And eventually, nobody was safe. This picture isn't very clear, but it kind of says, "Wonder how long the honeymoon will last," and it pictures Stalin and Hitler as if they were married, because even Stalin was going to eventually be a target of Hitler's. The idea that Hitler could never keep his promise or be trusted. But with the beginning of World War II here, what we'll take a look at in our next episode is the European theater of war.